smiling crowds and playful splashes. Trainers riding dorsal fins to applause. The illusion of control, the magic of the show, until something broke. It happened in an instant, yet it was years in the making. A brutal moment, hidden beneath the surface of choreographed smiles and perfect splashes. Predator performing, a woman trusting, and then the water turned red. This wasn't just a tragic mistake. It was a warning, one we've seen before, one we chose not to hear. This is the story of Dawn Brancheau, a woman who gave her life to the animals she loved, and the orca who, on a quiet afternoon, took that life in front of hundreds of witnesses. What really happened that day? Why did he snap? And how many signs were missed along the way? Welcome to Animal Attacks, the channel that exposes the shocking truth behind animal behavior, captivity, and the humans who get too close. If these real-life stories move you, hit subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Now let's go back to how it all started. For Dawn Brancheau, it was always the orcas. Not the fame, not the thrill, not the stage lights. It was them, the towering black and white giants with minds as vast and mysterious as the ocean itself. There was something in the way they moved, something that pulled at her. A mix of power, grace, and something deeper: intelligence, emotion, soul. That fascination turned into study, and that study became purpose. Dawn pursued a degree in animal behavior and marine biology, graduating with honors. But what made her stand out wasn't what she learned from books. It was what she felt when she was near the animals. When SeaWorld brought her on board, it wasn't long before her bond with the orcas became legendary. Other trainers used signals and scripts. Dawn used presence, stillness, trust. To those around her, it looked effortless. To the whales, it felt safe. Dawn wasn't just performing beside them. She was speaking a language few understood. And that bond, the trust she cultivated, became the cornerstone of her career. She believed training wasn't about control. It was about connection. But trust is fragile. And in a world built on repetition and risk, even the strongest bonds can fracture. One whale, in particular, had a past as deep and troubled as the waters he swam in. He was the largest killer whale in captivity, 22 feet long, 12,000 pounds, a creature of immense presence, and even deeper scars. Tilikum, his name would one day become infamous, but his story began thousands of miles from the stadium lights of SeaWorld, off the cold, wild coast of Iceland. He was just a calf, young, disoriented, separated from his family pod, yanked from the ocean and flown across the world into a concrete cell. That moment marked the beginning of a life in confinement. And over time, it marked a shift in his mind. Tilikum's first home was a Canadian park called Sealand of the Pacific. Conditions were primitive. Space was limited. He was often bullied by the older females, trapped at night in a metal holding module barely longer than his body. And then, in 1991, tragedy. During a training session, a young female trainer named Kelty Burns slipped and fell into the pool. What happened next was chaos. Tilikum, along with two other orcas, dragged her under. She never resurfaced. It was the first death connected to Tilikum, but not the last. Despite the incident, Tilikum was sold to SeaWorld Orlando. There, he became the star of the show, breaching high, slapping water, drawing awe from crowds of thousands. But behind the glass, the warnings were still there. Trainers noticed his unpredictability, moments of aggression, jaw-popping, resistance to commands, signs that something beneath the surface was shifting. In 1999, a second death. A man, allegedly a trespasser, was found dead, draped over Tilikum's back in the morning. Bite marks, bruising, drowning. Still, he remained in the rotation. Still, the shows went on, because Tilikum drew crowds, and crowds meant money. By the time he met Dawn Brancheau, Tilikum had already been linked to 2 fatalities. He had spent nearly his entire life in captivity, a titan bred for performance, haunted by a history no one dared speak aloud. What do you get when you take the ocean's top predator, strip him of his world, and make him perform? To the public, SeaWorld was magic, a place where ocean giants danced to music, where trainers surfed the backs of whales, and danger was nothing more than a dramatic splash for the front row. But behind the orchestrated joy was something far more complicated, and far less safe. The illusion was powerful. Perfectly timed jumps, waves to the audience, even kisses on the nose. But what looked like harmony was really control. Every moment was scripted. Every movement drilled into the animals through repetition, food reinforcement, and strict routine. The whales weren't performing because they loved the stage. They were performing because it was the only way to eat. Behind the curtain, the reality was steel gates, holding pools, and regulated diets. A system that monitored behavior like a machine. But whales aren't machines. SeaWorld had protocols, safety drills, contingency plans. But control is not the same as understanding. And for all their planning, they forgot what they were dealing with. Killer whales, or orcas, are apex predators. They are built for speed, for strategy, for survival. In the wild, they coordinate hunts. They teach their young. They mourn their dead. In tanks, their world shrinks. Their minds warp. And their instincts don't disappear. They distort. SeaWorld taught its staff to trust the system, to believe the shows were safe, that the whales were conditioned, predictable. February 24, 2010, 1:59 p.m. SeaWorld Orlando. But on that day, in that tank, the illusion shattered. At first, it felt like any other show. The Florida sun was bright. The audience buzzed with laughter and camera flashes. And Dawn Brancheau, SeaWorld star trainer, stepped onto the poolside platform with the grace and confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Tilikum, the park's largest orca, breached in perfect form, drenching the first few rows. It was controlled, familiar, but beneath the surface, something else stirred. 2 p.m. The show reached its final cue. Dawn signaled for a side swim, a maneuver she and Tilikum had rehearsed countless times. But this time, Tilikum didn't follow the script. In one brutal instant, Tilikum launched forward, clamping down on Dawn's arm, or her ponytail, accounts still differ, and yanked her into the water like a rag doll. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some thought it was still part of the act. But trainers knew. They saw the difference in the movement, the violence, the refusal to release. Emergency signals filled the tank, sharp, pulsing tones meant to break the orca's focus. But Tilikum didn't flinch. He dove deeper, twisting, dragging. Dawn's body vanished beneath a boiling surface of white foam and blood. They tried everything: food, lures, barriers, desperate to separate the two. But Tilikum stayed submerged, locked in his deadly spiral. 7 minutes. That's how long she was trapped. 7 agonizing minutes of thrashing, silence, submersion, and struggle. And then, a lifeless body surfaced. Trainers pulled her from the water, unmoving, broken. CPR began immediately, but there was nothing left to save. Her injuries were devastating. Her heart, silent. In just under 10 minutes, SeaWorld lost its most celebrated trainer. A crowd of families witnessed a living nightmare. And the world saw for the first time that the illusion of control was a deadly lie. Paramedics arrived minutes later. They continued efforts, but the damage had already been done. Dawn was gone. Her injuries were massive blunt force trauma to her torso and head, a dislocated jaw, fractured ribs, and the final cause of death, drowning. Though medical examiners would later admit, the internal trauma alone might have ended her life before the water ever did. Less than 4 hours later, SeaWorld released its official statement. It was short, sterile, and it told the public nothing. But the story was already unraveling. Media outlets dug deeper. Journalists asked harder questions. And what they uncovered was far darker than anyone expected. The federal investigation began within hours. OSHA agents reviewed safety protocols, internal records, Tilikum's entire behavioral history. This wasn't a one-time accident. Tilikum had been involved in 2 previous deaths. Incidents that had been documented, reviewed, and then quietly buried. Now it was all coming to light. The injury reports, the behavioral red flags, the near misses, and the chilling truth. SeaWorld had kept a 12,000-pound time bomb in the rotation because he drew crowds. In the hours after Dawn's death, there was grief. But in the days that followed, grief turned into outrage, and silence became impossible to maintain. Dawn Brancheau's death wasn't just a tragedy. It became a fault line, a dividing moment, a name that could no longer be separated from a deeper, unsettling truth. Something had to change. The public wasn't asking for answers anymore. They were demanding them. Inside sources stepped into the light. People who had worked with the whales. Trainers who once believed in the magic. Now revealing what it cost. We knew Tilikum wasn't safe, but we were told to smile, to keep going, to keep performing. Soon, this wasn't just about Dawn. It became about every orca in captivity. Every trainer pushed beyond safety. Every choice made in the name of applause. Within weeks, pressure reached the political level. Legislation that had sat in drawers for years was dusted off. Petitions gained millions of signatures. And behind closed doors, SeaWorld scrambled. In a move that shocked the world, SeaWorld officially suspended all in-water performances with killer whales. Trainers would no longer swim beside the giants they once called partners. The show was changing because it had to. Emergency protocols were rewritten. Behavioral assessments became stricter. And a new department, focused entirely on enrichment and mental well-being, was born out of blood and regret. But Dawn's story didn't end at the water's edge. Her family refused to let it. In the shadow of unbearable loss, they built something lasting. The Dawn Brancheau Foundation now supports marine mammal research, promotes trainer safety, and funds future scientists who dream, like Dawn once did, of understanding the creatures of the sea, not exploiting them. Some called her naive, others called her brave. But all agreed Dawn believed in the bond between humans and animals. She believed it was built on trust. And when that trust shattered, it left more than just heartbreak. It left a mirror. The world had to decide what it was willing to see in that reflection. Some stories end with applause, others with silence. But the silence left behind by Dawn Brancheau's death was not empty. It spoke, loudly, unforgivingly, and it demanded a reckoning. In the wild, orcas swim up to 100 miles a day. They form family bonds that last a lifetime. They mourn, they teach, they live in societies more complex than we ever imagined. In captivity, they circle the same few feet. Again and again. No horizon, no pod, only applause. We told ourselves they were happy, that the shows were harmless, that this was education. But maybe we just didn't want to look too closely. Dawn's death shattered the illusion. It reminded us that a 12,000-pound predator does not become tame because we trained it to wave. That trust, even the deepest kind, does not erase wild instinct. But it also reminded us of something else. That change is possible. That awareness is power. We can honor Dawn, not just by mourning her, but by listening to what her story has taught us. To question the cages we've built, not just with steel, but with pride. To rethink what we call entertainment, and ask, at what cost? Because there is a message in the blood, a warning carved in grief, and if we ignore it, we risk repeating it. If Dawn Brancheau's story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to stay informed and support stories that matter. Like this video to amplify awareness. Share it with someone who still believes orcas belong in tanks. Support marine conservation efforts. Learn, question, speak. Because behind every tank, behind every splash, is a living, thinking being. And behind every tragedy is a choice we can still make differently. Dawn didn't die in vain, but the next chapter is up to us.